Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and in this video, I'm here to consider the question, is $2,000 the sweet spot in high-end headphones? And here's why I ask that. Because we now have three really high-quality options at $2,000 for open-back headphones. And in alphabetical order, those to me are the HEDD HEDDphone version 2, the HiFiMan HE1000se, and the Modhouse Tungsten Double Sided. Again, all three of these are right about $2,000, and they are all stellar performers that I have reviewed in the past, and will put links to my individual reviews of them down in the description. It was very recently here that I heard the Headphone V2, and not quite as recent, but still relatively recent, that I heard the Modhouse Tungsten. And they are excellent, right? They are very, very good. And I am particularly excited about them because for a time, the HE1000se here was the only one of these three that existed at $2,000. It was originally a $3,500 headphone, and then HiFiMan flexed on the market and cut its price to $2,000, where it has been for over a year now, and so I think that just is the price. And this one, I think, really warped the price-performance curve in its favor in the market. But it has a specific fit. It has a specific sound. It may not work for all of you. Okay, so that's why I was excited when these two came along, to give us bona fide competitors and options at this price point. So what I want to do here today in this video is, first of all, compare all of these three. And then I also want to talk about what this means for the high-end headphone market. What does having three really high-quality headphones with different sounds available at $2,000 mean for those who might be interested in buying, say, a $1,500 headphone, or a $3,000 headphone, or even a $4,000 or more headphone? Okay, what does that mean? So I want to talk about that in this video today. I'm also going to talk about some more like my personal preferences on sound and how that has informed these opinions and what I'm going to say in this video. And I want to stress that in this video, you are simply hearing my opinions on these things. I am not the final word. No reviewer is the final word on any of the preferences on sound, how these sound, how they compare to each other, or what they do to the market. So I offer my thoughts in this video as a conversation starter, and I encourage you to get into the comments below and give me your thoughts on these three headphones or the state of the headphone market, whether or not $2,000 is kind of a sweet spot in the hi-fi headphone space, and so forth. So please stick around after shameless self-promotion and let's explore all of that together.
Hello. I'm one of the reasons that Wave Theory can't spend all of his money on audio gear. He wants you to know that your support is vital for keeping the channel running. So if you enjoy Wave Theory's bussin' review riz and no-cap review style and want to encourage him to stay in the basement so I don't have to listen to his dad jokes as much, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also send him a donation on PayPal or sign up for the Patreon. Links are in the description. Now on to the review.
Let's quickly start off with what are my preferences, and that will help inform and help you contextualize my thoughts on these headphones and of the market itself and why I am placing these in the market the way that I am doing so. Okay. I have said these things on my channel before, but it's often useful just to collect them all in one spot here and there, and I'll try not to drag this out too long. See timestamps in this video if you want to jump around and get to other things. We could be here a while. All right. My preferred genres of music is, I will say, long live rock and roll, right? I am a big fan of rock music and most of its subgenres. Heavy metal, classic rock, okay, grunge, I mean, punk, you name it, okay? I like a huge range of rock and metal, and I would say that that makes up probably 70 to 75% of my music listening. What comes next to me is larger scale orchestral works. Things like bigger symphonies, Beethoven's Fifth, Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, those kinds of things are in there. But also orchestral soundtrack kind of stuff, like a big fan of Hans Zimmer, John Williams, okay? There are others, of course, but just to give you an idea of the kind of stuff that I'm listening to in there, like that's in there as well. And I would say that that overall genre, you know, just the classical orchestral, kind of on a larger scale usually, is like the next biggest chunk of my music listening. Split that up and, or split up the remainder across jazz, hip hop, a little bit of R&B in there as well, EDM and all of that in there, like individual tracks for those kinds of things. I'm not usually prone to just put on a full album on that sort of thing. Okay, and then like the pop music as well, I do listen to. I was mostly lumping that into a subgenre of rock and roll. You can argue whether it's more rock or hip hop or R&B anymore or anything like that, but I was including pop music in the rock category, so I do listen to that somewhat as well. So those are my music preferences across the board. Since I lean heavily into the rock and metal kind of space, for me then, like that colors my sound preferences on things, because rock and roll and particularly heavy metal and all of that, like heavy metal gets its name from having like a more bass emphasized kind of sound. The heavier, thicker bass on it just gives it that thick, heavy sound that comes with heavy metal. All right, and then also like the drumming and all of that, and just the aggression behind a lot of rock music and all of that. So I tend to like a slightly warmer, sometimes bass heavier sound. I tend to like a lot of physical impact and intensity in the low end, so like kick drums that you can really feel, like when a bass guitar string, I should say, is plucked aggressively, you get a nice aggressive hit on that and that sort of thing. Now, with the orchestral and soundtrack kind of stuff, well, I also like a lot of low bass rumble, okay? String basses, pipe organs, I like the sound of a pipe organ, so a nice, full, robust, and extended low end is often usually important to me as well. All right, now other aspects of sound that I enjoy just because to me they help things sound real. And I should say that like from a listening and like sound reproduction standpoint, one of my biggest goals personally is for what I am hearing, what's coming through a headphone or a speaker or whatever, is as close to the real thing as it can possibly be. Okay, in other words, I want someone's voice to sound like a real human voice. I want a drum to sound like a real existing drum, specifically that drum that was recorded. Okay? Likewise, for pianos, guitars, stringed instruments, horned instruments, doesn't matter. My listening preference and my listening goal is for that sound reproduction to sound as close to the real life sound as it possibly can be. Now, that can get tricky. That goal of sounding as close to the real life sound as possible can get tricky, particularly when you're talking about studio recordings and with instruments that don't necessarily have a natural sound really on their own. So I say a lot of rock and metal, right? Which means a lot of distorted electric guitars. Electric guitar natural sound, when it's not put through any amplification or anything like that, doesn't really have much of a sound other than just clicking, clanging strings, right? So when I judge pieces of gear on whether or not they sound natural, I tend to, like when I'm answering that question, does it sound natural, does it sound real? I tend to use vocals, because those have a real and natural sound, and human ears are very attuned to hearing human vocal sounds, okay? And then also acoustic instruments like, acoustic drums, pianos, acoustic guitars, trumpets, orchestra kind of instruments, right? Because those do have a real world sound to them. I had the fortune of growing up in a family where a lot of different instruments were played, and so I feel like I was able to get familiarized with a lot of natural sounds of several different instruments, so I have that baseline in there too. Now, different people will perceive different sounds differently and will have different takes on what real and natural means. I'm just telling you where my experience comes from on that. The point that I was making there before that little sidebar is that if I can trust a headphone to reproduce human voices, pianos, acoustic guitars, drums, and other acoustic instruments well, then the likelihood goes up and I start to trust it more to reproduce the sound of artificially created sounds like distorted electric guitars or synthesizers or things like that. Okay, that are intentionally routed through a whole bunch of electronic gizmos, be it vacuum tubes in a guitar amp, different guitar amps, compressors, okay, other kinds of effects things, and all of that that are happening in the studio. If it does acoustic instruments well, then it can reproduce all of that artificially kind of created stuff or electronically created stuff well also. At least that's what makes sense to me. All right, so then in terms of reaching a realistic and natural sound, what am I looking for in my reproduced music sound here and my sound system and when I review and all of that kind of stuff? And I think there really are two major aspects in there that help with the natural sound. One of them is the tuning. Okay, the tonal balance of any speaker or headphone or any piece of gear really, but speakers and headphones is where this one really comes out the most, is vitally important. There needs to be, within a certain level of tolerance, a natural and realistic relationship between the fundamental frequency that an instrument or a voice produces and the harmonics that come with it. Okay, the relationship between like the amount of bass versus the amount of mid-range versus the amount of treble on those like bigger categorizations of frequency response is not quite as important as that tonal balance between fundamentals and harmonics. If you want to sound realistic and natural, you gotta start there. Another critical aspect then is resolution. Okay, and resolution often, I think, and I'm probably guilty of this too in the way that I talk about it, but resolution is often confused with detail retrieval. Detail retrieval is an aspect of resolution, but resolution is a bigger picture term than just that, okay? And why do I say this? Well, voices, instruments, and all of that kind of stuff, when they are recorded with microphones. A good microphone, and most recording studios, and if we're recording a live performance in a concert hall or at a concert or whatever, like most microphones used for professional level recording anymore are pretty darn good, right? And so what that means is that for the most part, the microphone is doing a pretty good job of picking up those naturally occurring relationships between fundamental frequencies and their harmonics, and the subtle details that are in the sound, and things like the time delays. If you've got two microphones set up in a stereo setup in a concert hall, and then they're like here, and then there's a sound from over there, the one on my left is going to pick up the sound first, and then the one on my right is going to pick up the sound with a slight delay. That time delay is in the signal that ultimately gets recorded and put on a record or a CD or in a digital file, okay? It's there to some degree. It is in there. Resolution is in part, can it pull out those slight time delays and all of that, okay? Also, the natural timing of the attack and the decay of a vocal presentation or of an instrument is also, to some degree, going to be picked up by that microphone. So, resolution then, big picture, is how well can a music reproduction system, okay, could be a headphone system, could be a speaker system, whatever, but how well can a music reproduction system recreate the very detailed and complex electronic waveform that represents all of those things that we just talked about and reproduce them through the speaker or headphone driver. How close can it get to that? So resolution really means the ability to resolve the signal or reproduce the signal. How faithfully can it do that? Which is one reason why our hobby uses the term fidelity in terms of high fidelity, because that term fidelity is about how well the waveform that comes out of something like these, okay, matches the waveform that went into the recording medium. Okay, so resolution then is extremely important, I think, and I have been called a resolution hawk or a resolution freak or whatever, and to some degree that is deserved and that is true. But that is because resolution, when done well, when detail retrieval, when done well, is one of the critical aspects of reproducing realistic sound, okay? It's in the signal. Can the gear pull it out? Okay, can the gear reproduce it? So there are a lot of things, there are a lot of aspects about listening and reproducing sound that are connected to that resolution. Spatial presentation, the holography, the imaging, the separation, the depth, the layering, those kinds of things are at least in part connected to resolution. I have not heard a headphone or a speaker really that isn't fantastically holographic, that isn't also fantastically resolving. Okay, those two traits are often tightly intertwined, and I think that is at least in part because the spatial holography, the spatial presentation, is attached to the ability of the system to resolve the signal. Likewise with the timings of attack and decay and that sort of thing. To some degree, those are in the signal. Resolution, excellent resolution, can help pull those out. Now what's interesting is that the motion of a speaker or headphone driver is going to put its own spin on attack and decay timing. Okay, so it's not just about resolution there are other aspects to it, but resolution plays a role. Okay, so there hopefully is a not too long description of like my music preferences and then also the things that I value a lot in sound reproduction, okay, and why I value them. So with that, let's now turn our attention to these headphones. Real quick, let me just buzz through as a reminder each of these three headphones, and I'll quickly list some of the pros and cons of each one. And we'll just go in alphabetical order again. So that means we'll start with the Headphone V2. All right, so this one is the AMT, Air Motion Transformer, or essentially a ribbon driver headphone in there. And so that's unique amongst these three here. Its sound signature is mostly neutral, slight mid-range emphasis. The bass and treble extension in either direction is not world-beating, but it's also not poor in there as well. It has a very smooth and non-fatiguing overall presentation. So I think that it has particularly excellent timbre in the mid-range in particular. So vocals, pianos, stringed instruments, acoustic guitars, those kinds of things just all sound very realistic and natural to me through this unit there as well. So pros on this is that it's a very relaxed, non-fatiguing sound, but it does it without sacrificing detail retrieval or resolution, really, because the details are all there. The resolution is excellent. The spatial holography also excellent, and so forth. It is a big improvement over the version 1 in terms of dynamic impact, particularly in the low end. There is some slam, there is some punch here, and that sort of thing. Not world-beating. It's not going to be like a Focal or a Fostex in that degree, but it at least gets it up to the level where it is not a true weakness of the sound either. Okay, and then some cons of this one then. It is the heaviest and the bulkiest in the build of these three here. I think the weight is distributed well, and I did not have any comfort issues with it, but your mileage will vary on that. Also, the opening, the ear opening on the cups is on the smaller side. So if you have larger earlobes, you might feel some pressure of it pushing there on your ears, and that may or may not bother you. Also, it is an open back headphone, but it doesn't necessarily sound open, very open, either when it's on your head with nothing playing or when the music is playing, just because there's not as much in the air frequencies, at least not to my ears on this one, as some of these others. So some people may find it a little bit overly dark, but it does EQ well if you want to do fixes to those. So there's just some quick pros and cons there on the Headphone V2. Next in alphabetical order, HiFiMan HE1000se. Pros on this one. It's the easiest driving of these three, and so it is like amplifier forgiving in terms of power demand on there. It also is the biggest sound stager of this group, and it is one of the biggest sound stagers of any headphone out there, period. Like bigger soundstage than like a Susvara, even, you know, at much more money and all of that. Like just the soundstage on this thing just has an epic scale to it. Now it can scale it down and do more intimate sounds if the music calls for it, but when you need to go big or go home, this one can go big. Okay, so there is that. This one, the holography of it, the spatial presentation of it, the three-dimensionality of it, to me, of these three, stands out the most, and I don't know if it's because it's actually technically superior to these two in that way, or if it's just because of the bigger soundstage, it's just a little bit easier to hear how holographic it is, which could be a psychoacoustic effect going on there. This one has the most sub-bass and low-end dynamic impact. It has the best bass extension of this group here. I think it has the best bass timbre in this group as well. So there, it has that going for it there too. Now there is a bit of a treble shelf on this one. I find the relationship, again, between fundamental frequencies and their harmonics through the treble, so above about 3 kilohertz, to be pretty realistic and natural on this one, but it is kind of a shelf. There just is a brightness to its presentation up there that isn't going to work for everyone. A lot of people call it, think of it as sharp and sibilant. I think the sharpness and the sibilance is really more of an issue with signal chains, because while it is not particularly amp demanding from a power standpoint, it will find the flaws in your signal chain in terms of treble reproduction very quickly, and then aggressively fire those flaws down your ear canals. Okay, and I think that is in a large part what's going on there. But even with a good chain, it just has a natural brightness to it that isn't going to work for everyone. Another aspect that isn't going to work for everyone is that it is just very large. Okay, these egg-shaped HiFiMans are big, and so if you have a smaller head, you may have some seal issues at various points on the side of your head, just given your head size and head shape. I don't think that is a common problem, but I have heard some people who have a little bit smaller heads say that they struggle with the seal, particularly behind the ear down in this area. I believe that becomes an issue for them, so that's something to keep in mind as well, okay, with the HiFiMan. All right. The tungsten here. The double-sided Modhouse Tungsten has some of the best treble timbre I have heard of any headphone, period. So that is a true strength of this unit here. Also, I'm going to put customizability in as a strength of this headphone as well, because you can get different pads for it, and then Ryan also makes a couple of spacers in there that can break the seal by different amounts. Now, I personally, to get the most out of this headphone, needed his metal spacers and the hybrid pads in there to get the sound, like all of the, the dynamics, the resolution, the detail retrieval, the spatial holography, and all of that up to the level of these two. But it turns out that there was a pressure buildup for me that the metal spacer and the hybrid pad combination relieved enough that I could hear the excellence of this and its equivalency to these two come out, okay, with those. So not everyone is going to suffer from that problem. I have made a video about this, link in the description. But for those who may have some pressure buildup issues with this headphone, which sounds like there might be a few, okay, for those of you who have it, you have options. Even if the pressure buildup is not a problem for you, you get a lot of customizability with this. Like you can change it aesthetically with different color schemes and painting for a small extra fee, okay, in there, so that you can visually personalize it and customize it that way. But then also sonically, because this one over the other two allows for some pad rolling, and also like you can get those spacers in there of different size and different venting style to change the sound as well and really get it dialed in to your liking. Okay, so some real strengths there. Now, weaknesses of this one, really we have to talk about the amplification, because this is a high impedance, low sensitivity headphone. The double-sided version here has 155 ohm impedance with a, I believe it's a 78 or 79, anyway, upper 70 decibel per milliwatt in terms of sensitivity. So it is a voltage hungry in particular, but very difficult headphone to drive. So that's its biggest weakness as just the product itself. Another issue that's outstanding right now is that there's still a long lead time in terms of getting these built for you. And then if you buy one, you've got several weeks. I've heard 16, I've heard 20, all of that as of the filming of this video. But point is, many weeks of wait before you could actually get it into your room and on your head. Okay, so that is something to be aware of there. But let's go through individual traits of sound, and I will just kind of rank all of these, okay, in there as we go. And I want to emphasize all three of these headphones are strong across the board. They sound excellent. They all sound a little bit different from each other. They are all like emphasize different aspects of sound in a little bit different ways. So you have options, but they have relatively few weaknesses or true deal breakers. It's just going to be which sonic profile fits the best for you here. And so when I say, for example, let's just talk about like mid-range timbre, I would rank them here. Okay, the HEDD 2 as the best, and then it's a virtual toss-up, I think, between these two. Okay, after that, okay, that doesn't mean that these two are poor in mid-range timbre. They are most assuredly not poor. They are very strong in mid-range timbre. They're just not quite as strong as what the HEDD V2 is, okay? So that's an example of the kind of thing that I'm talking about. That just to say that one of these is better than the others at a particular aspect in no way means that the others are poor. Again, these things are pretty strong across the board. All right. Resolution and detail retrieval. Let's start there. I'm going to give just the slightest of edge to the HE1000se. Texturing is the clearest to me on this one. Subtle details and all that also come through to me the clearest on this one. And then other things like, I think it might be the most holographic of the spatial presentation here. Again, I'm holding out that it could be a little bit tricky there just because of the size of the soundstage on this one could make the aspects of the spatial presentation just stand out a little bit more, be a little bit more prominent than the other two. But even with that, I'm still slightly leaning toward it being the most holographic, okay, on that as well. And I bring that up here because, as I said at the top of the video when I talked about my preferences and my values and all of that sort of thing, to some extent, resolution and spatial holography are connected to each other. This one also does the best job of these three about pulling out subtle differences in dynamic range, okay? Dynamic range, meaning the difference between quiet and loud. This one does the best job of resolving the subtle differences in volume out there of these three. It's also the most impactful in the low end. Okay, so most sub-bass rumble, the most impact with kick drums and electric bass guitar plucks and those sorts of things in there as well. And again, I want to emphasize the other two are not poor in any of those traits. Okay, it's just that this one stands out more on those. Now, the relative weakness is here, like it's not as strong in the mid timbre as the others. So vocals, while still sounding quite realistic, don't sound quite as present or real as it does on the other two. Okay, and then also in the treble, The treble on this to me sounds very good. It does lean a little bit brighter than many others. It is signal chain sensitive on this. You can use a copper cable, for example, if silver is a little bit too bright for you and that sort of thing. Okay, but when things go awry, it's usually in the treble. So some fatigue can come through even for me on like poorly recorded hard rock and heavy metal. And there's a lot of poorly recorded rock and metal out there where this one can just be a little bit too aggressive and a little bit too fatiguing. Okay, so those are the drawbacks for me. But as a reviewing tool, this one has become amazing for me just because it's relatively easy to drive and so highly resolving that I get a pretty good idea of what signal chain gear is doing, particularly when the amplifier can't push my Susvara or is, does not make my Utopia happy, which happens a lot, okay? So those sorts of things here. So those are the aspects of sound that I think that the HE1000se is the best out of these three: the raw resolution, the spatial holography, the bass impact and extension, and so forth, and then the ability to reproduce small and subtle changes in dynamic range, I think is where this one stands out the most here. Okay. Let's talk about then mid-range timbre. I've already said like this one, mid-range timbre, fantastic. Vocals, pianos, string instruments, it just sounds so real on this one. It's almost surreal how so real it is. Honestly, very, very good on that. The other aspect of this one is just like this one is arguably the smoothest and least fatiguing of all of these. And despite how resolving it is, which is high, it's also the most forgiving of bad recordings, which can be an advantage too. Again, for me who likes rock and metal and all of that, some tracks that became harsh and fatiguing on this one. One that stands out is the Roulette Dares, The Haunt Of by Mars Volta, right? Can sound really aggressive and fatiguing on the HE1000se, but sounded oh so good on the Headphone V2. Okay. So that's really where a lot of its strength lies. There's in that mid-range timbre in there, and just how realistic vocals and all of that sound here. Like really, very, very good on that one. Okay, so that's really the strength here. And then the tungsten, I've already mentioned the treble timbre and just how good that is. And this one is like kind of in between these two. If this one is a little bit too dark for you, and you don't want to do EQ, and this one is too bright for you and you don't want to do EQ, this one slots in nicely right in the middle there. Okay, and so I mean that's a nice advantage on this one as well. And this one, like again, the sound signature on this one is hard to pin down just because you can pad roll and you can do the seal breaking, all that, and so there's a lot of customizability on it there. Okay, so I mean that just gives you a lot of choices and a lot of different options that you can do within that. Okay, but like I want to emphasize that I would put all three of these roughly on the same technical level. I am aware that I called the HE1000se the winner on the larger number of technical aspects, okay? But it is not by a huge amount. Like the resolution and the holography, for example, I am really truly splitting hairs there. Okay, and it's not in the detail retrieval where it shows up, because these two basically pull out all of the same details that this one does. It's just that this one is just slightly more holographic, slightly more textured, and again, slightly better at those subtle dynamic range differences, all of that, which again, I think are all, at least in part, connected to resolution, and that's why I give it the edge on that one. All right, so which should you buy at $2,000 US if you are in the market at $2,000? Well, if you want, I mean, resolution, truly call it a wash on all of these. It's just what you value after that. If you like a big epic stage, bass impactfulness, and you can handle a bit of a treble shelf and you like that brightness, HE1000se. Also, if you don't have a super powerful amplifier and you are worried about whether or not your amp can push these others, HE1000se. If you are a timbre hawk, particularly through the mid-range, okay? And you're treble sensitive, okay? Treble can be a little bit too sharp, gets fatiguing for you really quickly, and that sort of thing. Headphone V2. This one also, like, let's just talk drivability here a little bit. This one is not super hard to drive, but it does require a little bit of power. It's about 41 ohms and 89 decibel per milliwatt sensitivity, I believe, which is middling on both of those things. HEDD recommends a 1 watt per channel amplifier on this, and that for the most part sounds right. But that's pretty easy to achieve these days with headphone amps out there. So most desktop gear will handle this just fine. But again, if you are a mid-range timbre hawk and you are treble sensitive, okay, this one. If you are a person who is endlessly tweaking your sound, okay, and you like to be able to switch things up and change things and that and so forth, tungsten, okay? But again, you've got to have that amplifier that can handle it. See my review where I talk about amplifiers that can handle it. But assuming that you do, the customizability here is amazing. And then also, I just can't come back to enough, the treble timbre. Cymbals and all of that is done. This is not just compared to these two, but just compared to headphones, the headphone market, period. This is one of the best at treble timbre that I have heard out there, okay? Bar none. Okay. What does this mean for the market, though? And this is where I really want to elicit a lot of your thoughts and get feedback down in the comments. And I may even start a HeadFi thread where the conversation could go a little deeper on this topic because it just is of particular interest to me. The presence of these three headphones at $2,000 makes it really hard for me to recommend headphones that are like in that $1,500 to $1,800 price range. Because just pinch your pennies a little bit longer and you can get a significant step up in performance. Yes, I do think that these three headphones are a significant step up in performance from something like the HiFiMan Aria series or the HE1000 Stealth. Okay, those are like $1,300, $1,400 in there, but these are a significant step up in performance from those. I do think that these are a significant step up in overall performance from something like the Sennheiser HD800S. Okay, they do more things technically well. I think they have a better tonal balance through the entire frequency spectrum, and they are more resolving than the HD800S is. Okay. And most of all three of them, I think, have better dynamics and impactfulness than the HD800S, if that matters to you, okay? So headphones below $2,000, from like $1,500 up through $1,800, I have a really hard time recommending over these. The only exception might be something like the Fostex TH900 series, in the event that you are just a bass head that you need relentless sub-bass slam and impact. These three, even the Hexi here, are not going to catch the TH900 series in that particular aspect. So if you are looking for that one thing, then that might be the only instance where I would recommend something around $1,800 over one of these. Okay? All right, now going up. At $2,500 US, you have the ZMF Verite line. I would not recommend those over these. You have the ZMF Atrium line. Those are different enough sonically, and they bring their own unique kind of, they're just a different type of headphone. They are dynamic driver, they are high impedance at 300 ohms. So they match to like OTL tube amps better than these will. So if you have a particular amplifier that you like, or particularly a tube amp and that sort of thing, the ZMF Atrium line is high enough performing with certain genres of music, particularly for the open back. See my reviews. And then again, they are different enough that I can see that one and can recommend those for certain people looking for a certain kind of sound. But in terms of overall performance with amplifiers generally and across the board with musical genres, I think all three of these are better options and better price to performance options than the ZMF Atrium series. At $2,600, I believe, is also the Rossen Rad Zero. These are better than that one, okay? To me, pretty hands down on that, okay? I have a review of the Rad Zero I can link to down below as well. At $3,000, things start to get interesting. You've got the Abyss Diana MR there. You have the Meze Empyrean, now the Empyrean 2. I have reviews for both of those as well. I will link you to. And these headphones put the pinch on those $3,000 units quite a bit. It is very, very hard for me to recommend those $3,000 units over these, okay? You really have to jump up to, in my opinion, $4,000 or more to get to headphones that are going to, across the board, outperform these three. And it's not going to be every $4,000 headphone at that, okay? Like I will say, the Meze Elite, not going to do it, okay? The Dan Clark Audio Expanse, I thought was pretty much even with the HE1000se when I did that review. They sound different, but in terms of overall technical performance, I thought those two were pretty even. And that's when this one was $3,500. So it's really hard for me to recommend the Dan Clark Expanse when these three are sitting out there at $2,000 and are pretty much technical equals to that one. Also at $4,000 or around $4,500, we probably have to step up in there, but in that range, you've got the Abyss Diana TC. Do not recommend that over these. You have the Final D8000 Pro and the Pro Limited Edition. Don't recommend that over these either. Okay, I think the Yamaha YH5000SE is in that one, and that one has the resolution that might be better than these, but its tuning, at least to these ears, is really, really wonky. So I don't recommend that one over these three as well. You really have to get into like Audeze LCD5, Focal Utopia series, HiFiMan HE1000se, okay, and then some E-Stats. Stax SR009S, SRX9000, okay, those kinds of things before you really start to meaningfully outperform these headphones. These three headphones. HEDD version 2, HE1000se, Tungsten Double Sided. And so these are just my takes on the market after hearing a huge range of headphones here, and just like what I'm thinking and like what I'm going to start recommending to buyers here, or potential buyers, is stay under $1,500, okay, to look for a headphone. And if you're thinking about something in the $1,500 to $1,800 range, pinch your pennies just a little bit longer to get into one of these. Okay? Then after that, prepare yourself to have to spend in excess of $4,000 US. And this is for brand new MSRP costs. I know that open box deals and the used market exists, but open box deals in the used markets are not as stable as new MSRP prices and new availability to be able to really talk about like where things fit in the market and like what's the appropriate price to performance and all of that. Okay, so but be prepared to spend in excess of $4,000 to meaningfully outperform any of these three headphones. And then again, to these ears, the options for so doing are still hit and miss, even up there in that above $4,000 price. The Utopia series, Susvara, and like and a couple of Stax models for me are definite hits. On those, other things are starting to become misses, okay, to these ears for these three. So that is now going to kind of become my recommendation structure. Stay under $1,200, or then just save a little bit longer to get into these, and then be ready to know that an upgrade, a meaningful upgrade from these three, is going to be in excess of $4,000. Okay, so just be ready for that. So that is all kind of pulling all of that together. Is kind of why I asked the question at the top of the video: is $2,000 US kind of the sweet spot in high-end headphones right now? And I kind of think that it is, right? Because we now have three really good options, each with a different sound for different fits and for different sonic preferences as well, okay, in there. And they all are really excellent performers that can, like, across the board outperform several units that are more expensive than them, and that you have to spend at least twice their amount of money for brand new MSRP prices to have any kind of meaningful chance at meaningfully outperforming them. Okay, so yeah, I think these three have formed a new sweet spot in the market at $2,000 US, okay, in terms of price to performance ratio and that sort of thing. So, what do you think? Am I crazy? Maybe. Please respectfully tell me if I am down in the comments below. If you agree with me, that's fine too. You can tell me that down in the comments below. Am I just thinking about this all wrong? Tell me that down in the comments below too. And if you think this might be worthy of a HeadFi thread, let me know, and I can start one. But for now, this has been my roundup and comparison of the Headphone 2, the HiFiMan HE1000se, and the double-sided Modhouse Tungsten, all about $2,000 US, all fantastic, all easy for me to recommend. Okay, so here's my roundup and comparison of those things. So thanks for sticking through this long video. Thanks for watching. Again, please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. Check out my PayPal, check out my Patreon, check out my reviews of all of these individually, as well as a number of the other headphones that I named in this video. And as always, enjoy the music.